everyone, we are here. This is Band of Badgers. I am Dave, your host for this our next Q&A interview. Steve is here as always, pushing some
Hello,
buttons,
hello.
hopefully keeping the lights on. Hello, hello. But we are joined this time. This is David from Riftweaver, or also of Tales of Fablecraft. Thank you for joining us, David. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Dave. Thank you,
Cool.
Steve, for having me.
You're welcome.
Always good. I'm just going to push this button. So we're going to put you on the big screen. There we go. Big Tough Pete says evening. I've Big Tough Pete. Big Tough Pete. Right. If you have any questions for David, not me, that one, or you can ask me, I don't mind. Please do put them into chat in Twitch. We're going to answer as many questions as we can, so do keep them coming. We already have some questions sent in to us, so we'll get to those as well. But we want to know all your questions and all about what's going to happen with Fablecraft. And if you didn't see it, that was just a trailer. We'll be bringing up again, maybe in the middle, probably at the end. So do check that out. And the demo is available now on Steam. David, over to you. Where can they find it?
So yeah, right now we are live on Steam with our demo. So if you just search for Fablecraft on Steam or Tales of Fablecraft Steam on Google or whatever, it'll crop right up. Demo is free and the game is free. So the demo is what I would call like a small sample or teaser of the entire game. But the nice thing about it is it lets you basically get really hands-on with the VTT as it stands. So you can host games, you can create friends lists, you can create heroes, and do everything you would expect to do in a typical like virtual tabletop. And really, I think the biggest difference between some of the stuff that people are probably familiar with in the space is that we have designed our tabletop role-playing game specifically for the platform, which is great because it gives us the opportunity to basically integrate all the gameplay mechanics with the actual experience of the platform too.
There's a lot to do with this game as well, but I wanted to kind of bring it back. We're going to bring it back right to the start of Fablecraft. So what's the story behind Fablecraft? We want to know more about the behind the scenes, the background story, how it all started, when, more importantly, and you mentioned you're not the sole creator of this one.
Oh no. So there's a huge team behind this project. And I think you can, you watch the trailer and you can just tell, right? But it all kind of started, frankly, it started like almost 10 years ago. So it always was a bit of a sort of side passion project that me and a couple of friends were kind of talking about, wouldn't it be awesome to make a TTRPG? And, it's interesting because it had many different incarnations over the years. Like at first it was a card game. Like you literally would buy a deck of cards and that's how you play it. And then, I was making video games at the time and I was like, you know what? I know nothing about making physical goods, but I know a lot about making video games at this point. Yeah. So, the pandemic happened and, we were all losing our minds. And really the only thing that was keeping us sane was a weekly D&D game. And sometimes we would play even 2 or 3 times in a single week. And it started off with a game that I was hosting that was a homebrew thing on the Sword Coast. And actually, interestingly, it started off with Minds of Phandelver, and then it turned into something completely homebrew after that. Yeah. And then, it was our first time playing online. So we started on Roll20 and then we went to Foundry and we were just smitten. We loved it. Like our first time, we were in-person crew playing online for the first time. And I think the thing that really sucked us in was just how convenient it was that we could actually just run a game and do weekly sessions, no problem. Yeah. But we saw a lot of opportunity, and that was a huge impetus for Fablecraft and Riftweaver as a whole.
It made it completely accessible. I mean, however horrible the lockdown was, the need for the social interaction, and we
Yes.
found it through a webcam
Yep.
and through playing games, which is one of the best things. And games which also play stories and allow your imagination to wander. So no matter what your confines are, allows you to explore more. And we did the same thing. Again, we were playing in person. We had table games, multiple table games for Band of Badgers as a social club. And then when we went into lockdown, it was, well, how do we do this? And then you start seeing people doing stuff. It's like, well, let's try it. We had the technology. All we had to do is to get online and find these different things. But we did the same thing. We tried Roll20, Foundry. We tried all of the ones which were existing already. But it's really nice to hear that people have come out of it in another way. Said, well, how do we generate our game off the top of that? You mentioned some of the team behind it. We haven't actually met, but I know Claire is in the UK. She's your story writer or the campaign writer.
Yeah, yeah. She's our lead writer. And she joined us. It was like kind of a contract role where we were
Yeah.
like, oh, we need a real writer on the team. Like our creative director, very capable writer, but we wanted someone dedicated.
Yeah.
And, a lot of the artwork and the larger sort of like branding was a sort of creative director task, but we really
Yeah.
needed someone to like, we just want to focus on narrative and we want to focus on world building. And this was right around the time we started thinking about, well, okay, like what is the world setting like?
Hmm.
And what are, what are the races like? And the original pitch that I had was like, well, I want this to be a high fantasy setting. And is it cliche if we do, the classic Tolkien-esque races? And I was like, but what if I put a twist on it? And I pitched
Hmm.
this to our creative director and to Claire, and they hated it. They just like absolutely hated that idea.
That's a really bad idea.
Yeah, they were like, okay, we hear you, but what about this? And so they came back with, I believe, the Highlander. So like the Highlanders, which are from the Highlands,
Yeah.
spoiler, and they are these people who are very attuned with the sort of floating peaks that exist in our world, which is called Mythos. And they have these sort of rocky textures and elements uh, from the magic that flows through the land. And that goes
Hmm.
for all of our races in our game. So we have 4 homelands, and each of the homelands have their corresponding races. And yeah, that was all them. And they pitched me on the idea, and I'm like, okay, we can make this work. It's a lot of work because we're going to have to teach people
Yeah.
about your creations, which don't exist elsewhere. But I'm so glad we made that decision because it just like it brought a new freshness. And then once we started doing that, I was like, oh, let's not try and do the stuff that's been done to death. So you won't see your classic goblin or ogre or orc sort of
Yeah.
characters in Fablecraft. And instead, we worked really hard to kind of create and craft new sorts of monstrosities and evils and dangers to go up against.
Just while you're talking about the Highlander there, can we put some art up? We do have some. I just put that. This is one of the Highlanders. Am I correct?
So this is a long strider. So the long
Longstrider.
striders are from the Long Meadows, and this was so Darcy, our creative director, is from Kansas, and it was very inspired by her homeland. And so the rolling fields, like it was a very sort of like interesting idea. It's like, what if it was literally just a sea of green, like
Yeah.
endless rolling fields? And so each of the locations, each of the homelands, there is a sort of like animalistic sort of element or property to each of these characters and these races. And so for the Long Meadows and the Long Striders, they're very lion-esque, and you can kind of see that in some of the other artwork, especially where they have these sort of like golden amber eyes with almost like cat pupils to them. And they travel in what's called prides, and they're very nomadic people in general. There's actually the largest city in the world is called the Wandering Citadel. It's literally a city that wanders throughout the land. And also they have this sort of like telltale facial feature, which is that they have this sort of like half facial covering, and that is based on the time of day that they were born. So if you're born under a bright blue sky, you will have that sort of marking. If you're born at night, you'll have a darker marking. And if you're born at sunset or sunrise, similar like orangey purples pigment across your face.
Now you shared quite a lot of artwork with us, and we can bring that up, but we can talk through it. But the artwork is a thing. So when I was how I found you guys was just stuff on socials, and some artwork popped up, but immediately I'm like, what is this? Because you talked about there's a different fantasy spin, and you mentioned card games as well. And I put it in, that must be the new Magic the Gathering. It looked kind of like that.
Yeah, very
Just seeing this
inspired by
artwork.
Magic the Gathering, I would say.
I mean, beautiful artwork, and there was just an absolute ton of Magic the Gathering artwork out there. And I'm, again, a big fan of the artists and artwork. But some of these things are just incredible looking. So it's really, really nice to see this in a storytelling game. And it's not just a book with a single page and here it is, but you have different layers of this artwork in there. It pops up all over the place. There's these little touches as well, which is absolutely fantastic. I mean, Steve's flicking through the pages now. He's supposed to be controlling the buttons, not just like, oh yeah, that looks good. That looks good.
Well, but they do, as you say, they really do pop at you.
Yeah,
they really do. I mean, because you saw in the trailer as well. It's not just static tokens, because you've been able to integrate your gaming system with the software. You've got animated spell effects.
Yep.
Which is really, really great in terms of giving you that level of immersion in the game. But it does go beyond that, because you've got such a very vibrant color palette, which is what really makes it stand out. And you've got that high contrast as well, which is something I like personally. We were talking the other day about color palettes, and this is definitely my sort of taste, is that high contrast, very colorful, very neon colors.
Yeah, that was a huge win for us when we figured out very early on, honestly, probably before even the first piece of artwork that we got back. So if you go back to the Highlander rogue character here, so that was Callie. So if you keep going forward, it was this character. So this is our... Yeah, so it says Cora, but technically we call her Callie. So Callie, named after the Caladonna flower, which is a mountain flower, was one of the first pieces of artwork we ever did. I think it was the first character we ever commissioned. And we worked with this absolutely brilliant artist out of Toronto. And she's just like, we've been working with her for years now. Mm-hmm. And we knew from the very beginning that like high saturation color was going to be something we were pushing for, that we saw in the moment when we were starting this venture back in 2020, a lot of grimdark stuff, and love me some grimdark. Like I grew up playing Vampire the Apocalypse, and I grew up playing Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah.
And I love that dark, brooding, like desaturated bit. But we were like, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're pretty depressed as it is. And so we wanted to try and bring, like, literally and metaphorically, some color to the genre, and really make what we call a vibrant and hopeful land. It doesn't mean that there aren't dangers. It doesn't mean there aren't scary elements and nefarious elements in this world, but it is not a world like on the brink of destruction. It is not a world infested with a zombie apocalypse, for example.
Yep.
I mean, some of these artwork we've got here, do you want to talk us through if we just bring up the artwork on here?
Sure.
And not just the character art, but also the UI as well. What's
Sure.
happening in terms of the game? So I'm going to rewind this. Oh, by the way, everyone, I'll also point out that not only is it just did that work? No, FableCraft, but the company name is Rift. So FableCraft is the product.
Yes.
Is the game. But Riftweaver is actually the gaming company. So let's talk about that quickly before we come back to the game. Tell us a bit more about Rift. What is your hopes and plans for Riftweaver now that you've got this kind of product available? What else are you working on, if you're allowed to share bits and pieces? We'll tease some stuff at the end. But what about, is there anything else you can bring up?
Yeah, I mean, so like Riftweaver right now is almost 20 people strong, full-timers, I should say. And then, we've got, gosh, I can't even tell you how many scores of absolutely incredible artists and game designers, animators that we contract on like a sort of like permalance sort of basis.
Yep.
But really we're laser focused on Tales of Fablecraft right now. So like the hope is twofold. Like, one, we'll be launching later this year, still locking down exactly when that date is, but this year. And that will be on Steam for Mac OS and for Windows. And it will be on tablet for iOS and Android. And then next year, we're pushing very hard to get our mobile product out the door.
Mm-hmm.
That won't be pound for pound parity with the tablet and PC version, but you'll be able to play a full game of Fablecraft, no restrictions whatsoever. We're still on the fence about, can you GM from your phone? Because it's a lot to do from your phone. And then once that happens, we're really, really focused on our homebrew initiative. So we're really building this out sort of in the vision of games I grew up when I was a kid playing the first StarCraft and Warcraft 3. And so what those games did is they built in a suite of modification tools, modding tools, so that you can create any sort of game you want. And that's what we want to do in Fablecraft. And then the last piece of the puzzle is what we're calling like a homebrew marketplace. So if you create your own awesome homebrew campaign and you want to distribute it either for free or you want to sell it, that we become sort of like the Etsy of the sort of like VTT space, where like, you're an artist, you're a writer, you're making whatever for, you could be making your own homebrew TTRPG system, whatever it is, and then you can distribute it on our platform.
Nice. Do they? So here's a question: do they? The creators who, if they create their own homebrew world or adventure, do they have to use your game mechanic to do that?
Nope. No, that's the whole point, is to like make our game system modifiable enough that if you were mad enough to recreate 5e D&D in Tales of Fablecraft, that you would be able to do it. It would be an astronomical amount of work. So best of luck to anyone who would like to do that. But it would be feasible, because what we'll do is, as the homebrew tools become more and more robust, it will be like effectively like a pure scripting platform. So like, if you know a little bit of code, if you know a little bit of scripting, you can really make anything you want.
Because that's what I was thinking when I first saw Fablecraft, as an engine to display for GMs, to display to enable storytelling. Because we use StreamYard, what we're using now.
Yep.
And if we put some atmospheric music on, we can, but we only have one audio track. So it's either music but no sound effects. You can't have. Right. It's a dark and stormy night, but you don't get the howls of the wolves when you want to do it. We can't do when we put atmospheric images up. It's basically a PowerPoint, and you're sharing a screen. And battle map, we might have share a second screen, and we'll capture it that way. But having what you guys have done and being able to say, okay, we're going to play Pathfinder, we're going to play Alien RPG, and have those tokens, have those the magic effects, do what they do, fireball, ice, when they do ice spells, electricity spells, because they're kind of almost universal. that you upload your token picture that we know is part of the homebrew anyway, and you can upload your battle map, which is kind of the homebrew aspect. But to have that mechanic where, as I move the tokens around and they interact, they know this is an enemy and this is a good guy and they can attack, then the effect pulls off. I think that will be highly, highly attractive to the right audience.
We
Because
hope
that's the bit
so.
I like. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, undoubtedly, TTRPGs are my favorite genre of games, and I think part of the reason why I love it so much, as someone who has been making stuff basically my whole career, whether it's coding or art or animation, I think it's it's great to be making something that will hopefully contribute to other folks wanting to make stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
to tap into that creativity. I spent almost 10 years making puzzle games, which I love puzzle games.
Hmm.
But I think that two big missing pieces for me were like, I miss the collaborative element that exists in
Yeah.
TTRPGs, and I miss the creative element and the storytelling element. So, yeah, very, very lucky to be working in this genre. I love it.
I really like the fact that you've set this up to be customizable and allow people to go in there and create, as you say. You talked about StarCraft. I remember Neverwinter Nights, and Neverwinter
Sure.
Nights for
Yeah.
me
Neverwinter
Yeah.
Nights.
had the
Incredible.
greatest ability to build dungeons and your own homebrew campaigns, and that was one of the best editors I've ever used. And and it goes back to user experience. If something is easy to use, then people will use it and they'll go and create. And one of the things I liked about your DM's interface is it's very intuitive. You've got the scene set, you've got an almost step by step to put music on. There's your handout, right? We're going to go into an encounter. So there's the tokens. It was
Yes.
all, it was very intuitive for an experienced DM, but it's also very instructive for a newbie DM. We obviously play with a lot of new players. And one of the things is, I'm worried about doing something wrong, rolling the wrong dice. And as a GM, for your interface, very easy to use. You haven't got to worry about thinking about the mechanic. You didn't even have to read anything either, because in your tutorial
Audio.
campaign, you
Yeah.
can push the button and it reads it for you. I thought it was great. Really, really good interface.
That's one of the things that I liked as well is you don't have to worry about doing every single voice.
Yeah.
And I'm terrible at voices as well, which Steve knows because he's played in my games. But I echo the same thing as well. When playing through the solo game and the demo, everything is there, and if that organization is there when you're doing the homebrew, you won't miss anything, because quite often that when we're telling our stories, oh, we forgot the the scream in the background, or
Right.
the sound of this, or we forgot to put the image up, and we don't always want to go, oh, GM, have you got a what did that look like? Oh yeah, I've
Right.
got one of my papers, or here I've got it on my screen, because you've got those nudges in the interface. It's absolutely superb. So
So
I'm
I
really,
was winding up to a question with that whole narrative.
Sure.
Was that
Go on then.
very difficult to put together?
Oh, incredibly difficult. Like insanely difficult. It was easily I shouldn't say the part we underestimated the most. There was a couple of parts that we underestimated, but it was one of the parts that we underestimated. We were like, oh, we've been playing these games for 30 years. We've been doing our own homebrew campaigns for the vast majority of that time. We have played dozens and dozens of modules across many different TTRPGs. Surely it can't be that hard to do this stuff. And let me tell you, it's really hard. It's super, super hard. The stuff that you read and you're like, why did they do it like this? And you're like, you're scratching your head. When you start making it, you find out the reasons. And usually it's because people don't have context. So if you don't have an understanding of like, wait, why is this here and what's going on, and like, who are my characters and who are like my villains and where's the tension, et cetera, et cetera. Like, it's really, really, really hard to tell these sort of stories. And then imagine like, hey, I've never played one of these games before. And then it gets exponentially more difficult to sort of like onboard people and teach people. So yeah, I think that was like, we did just endless play tests. Like, and fortunately for us, our team is pretty mixed. So we've got, almost 20 people, a bunch of them are TTRPG experts, and a bunch of them, this is their first time playing a TTRPG is FABLECRAFT.
Yeah.
And so it was really good and lucky of us to get that mix, because they might be an excellent game developer, or they might be an excellent marketer, and then they might just not have that just that hours and hours of count of playing these games. And then they get in there and they play FABLECRAFT and they'd be like, I was really confused about this moment. And then we were like, well, okay, well, that's a problem. And then we go back and we try to fix it.
Did you find that the mechanic evolved as you were developing the software at all? You talked about having TTRPG bones from 10 years ago, and it started off as a card game. How much did it evolve over the process of doing the software and building Tales of FABLECRAFT?
Like night and day. Like it's a completely different game. Like the first iteration of the game, before it was a card game, after it was a card game. So like the very first version of us doing it in Unity is the software we used to code everything.
Yeah.
We were like, let's start with one of the hardest elements first. And so we started with basically we made a prototype of our battle map engine. So we were like, we're going to start with here, because we know we want to do it, which we debated, should we do it or should we not do it? Should we just do it all theater of the mind combat? It can be much more loosey goosey. And we were like, you know what? These battle maps are, first of all, they're so damn cool. And second of all, they're just so popular. We'd be crazy to not do it. So like, we're going to commit, right? And then the very first version of the combat system that I had a hand in designing was very similar to sort of what MCDM is doing right now. So it was you never miss. If there was rolling, it was only for sort of like variable damage. And it was a lot of fun. And it had a resource. So we had a mana resource, which, funny enough, I think some of the code remnants of that still exist in the project to this day. And we found very quickly two things. Like, one, like beginners do not care about, combat resources. They just don't. They don't want to deal with them. They just want to they want to do a cool thing on their turn.
Yeah.
And that's it. So we were like, okay, we're taking this out because too many beginners are getting tripped up on this. And then the other thing we found very insightfully from dozens and dozens and dozens of playtests was the never miss system very quickly. And I think this might be maybe a Tales of FABLECRAFT unique problem, because it is a VTT also, is very quickly battles became predictive, where you knew halfway before the end of the fight where the fight was going to go. Yeah. And that really bummed us out, where it was like, we would do these simulations. We were like, oh, we're going to try out this new monster. We're going to try out this new mechanic. We're going to try out this new player class. And very quickly we were like, halfway through the fight, we're like, oh, we know who won. And it sucked all the tension out of the room.
Yeah.
And then we hired a good friend of mine. I've known him since high school. He's been working in games for over 20 years now. He was like, he brought a dice mechanic into the game, and the basically the same dice mechanic we have today with some modifications.
Yeah.
And immediately it brought a sense of drama to the game. And we were like, oh, we like this quite a bit. And, we kind of never looked back after those initial prototypes.
I was just about to put some up, boss, because the dice mechanic is on the screen as well. So we're going to talk through that while we just flick through some of the artwork.
Yeah. So those are the dice. So those are the Fable dice. And the way they work is a couple of cool ways. So we have what's called our standard Fable dice, but Fable dice are anything but standard, which is kind of fun and unique about a digital product, is that you can actually manipulate the faces as you progress and level up through the game. But the standard die has a single 2. It has 3 1s. It's got a blank and a botch, and the botch is a -1. And what this does is, as you level up, and at level 1, you only roll a single die for combat, and then up to 3 dice depending on your skills. It creates a nice sort of ceiling and floor and average of what you're going to be rolling. So in combat, you only need to roll a 1 or higher to hit, and 4 of your sides are a 1 or a 2. So you're guaranteeing right out the gate that you've got a 2/3 chance of hitting on against any foe in FableCraft. And then if you roll a 2, we scale your abilities. So your healing will heal more, your damage will deal more, your armor will gain more. Which is just it's just such a fun mechanic, because suddenly you eliminate that problem that happens a lot with the D20 system, which is oh, you roll a natural 20 and then you roll min damage, and then suddenly that feels really bad. So now if you roll effectively a critical success, that will scale the output too.
We got some more here as well. So Steve, do you want to, David, do you want to talk us through each image as they pop up? And Steve, you have control over the buttons at the moment.
Yeah,
sure. So this is actually the very first battle map we ever commissioned, and so this is what we call King of the Hill clearing. We wanted to test what would be like to have walls and a high ground in our game. I don't know why we got very ambitious for our very first battle map, but we did. We since very much kind of toned it down a smidge. But yeah, that is a fun one to this day. And it was also, again, sort of leaning into a lot of the stuff that we were talking about before, about trying to make sure that our color palette was pretty saturated. This is honestly one of our more desaturated images. And also, this is us starting to explore some world building where we were we wanted some ruins and some old mysteries. And this is a very, very early, actually, I think our first exploration of one of the old world ruins.
That is stunning. I mean, look at that.
Yeah. And so all of our battle map art is done by Eightfold Paper. And I was using Eightfold Paper battle maps at the very beginning of the pandemic in 2020. I became a Patreon backer of theirs. And, again, so lucky to be working on this project, because as soon as we got going with this stuff, I reached out to them and I was like, hey, do you guys want to work on this really weird project? And they were all for it. And so, again, we've been working with those guys for years.
What is it? I mean, some of these screens as well. What is, who's writing all the background source material for this as well?
So it's a mix. So I would say a lot of the stuff you're showing right now, this was primarily Darcy. And so Darcy is our creative director, and she works closely with our lead sort of systems guy. And so our systems guy is that friend I was mentioning that I've known since high school. And so he is thinking about okay, from a very core mechanical level, how are things going to work? And they partner a lot. And then Claire joins in for the more ambitious storytelling bits. Also, Steve, you were mentioning how helpful the VO is. That is Claire. So Claire is not only our writer, but she's the voice of FableCraft as well. And yeah, so it's a very team effort. We all wear a lot of hats. A lot of the art that you're showing here is stuff that we did in the very beginning of the project. And we were a very small team back then. We were less than 10 people.
I was going to ask, what comes first? Is it the writing or the artwork, or does some of the art, if the artists have kind of free reign to do stuff, does that go,
Sure.
oh, we really like that, we've got to use it, it becomes part of history, it's canon, this is now part of the world?
It goes very hand in hand. So, like, sometimes there is an elaborate narrative, sort of like exploration that happens first, and then that will
Yeah,
lead the art. And then sometimes it's not. Sometimes it can be very loose. And what we have found, um, one of the big takeaways that I love about this project is, and if anyone's thinking about doing their own TTRPG, is give yourself however long you're going to give yourself more time,
more time.
because one of
Yeah,
the most precious resources you have is time. And what you don't want to do, in my opinion, is rush something. So, like, if
yeah.
you are working really hard to define like an element of your world, if you're trying to work really hard to define, even just like a creature or a town or a sword or whatever it is, like, if you set yourself these hard deadlines, you can rush past something that's
Hmm.
actually really important. And then if you take your time, those little pieces will feed into everything. Because, like, for example, a writer like Claire might see a piece of artwork, and that artwork might inspire a story, and then
Yeah.
all these things become very intertwined because of that.
One of the things as well is, Steve, if you go, yeah, that was it. Some of the character artwork or some of the pictures or the descriptions are also just incredible. Um, can you talk us through some of these as well?
Sure. So this is Korra, and so Korra is a wave chaser, and the wave chasers from the Coral Coast, they have, these sort of like brilliant tropical fish patterns
Mm,
on their skin, and they have, almost universally like these sort of bluish eyes, although or greenish eyes, and they can change in a variety of ways. And I think for them, like, the thing, they were the last of the races that we created. Um, was they became like sort of like the merchants, the natural merchants of Mythos, because they are flamboyant, they're travelers, they're explorers, and they have sort of like access to the waterways
yeah.
across the world. So they became sort of like our natural, sort of like, sort of exciting,
Hmm.
uh, sort of like almost like partiers. And the other thing too that we wanted to do was make sure, for characters, like Korra too, is sort of like lean into the magical element, because like in our game, similar to like a lot of the White Wolf stuff, every character in Mythos is a mage. And
Mm.
so every character, even if they're a heavy bruiser, has some sort of magical capability, even if it's pretty mundane.
You, I'm going to hark back to something you mentioned earlier about the artwork not being sort of dark and oppressive, because, as you say, this was created also during lockdown.
Yes.
We don't want to kind of make yourself even more depressed during
Yes.
that time when you're working
Yep.
on this artwork. And it is so colourful. Steve, if you go back, this one, it reminds, straight away, all I see is Moana. I mean, it's
Yeah.
beautiful blue skies, the sandy beaches, the bright, clear seas. That's what I'm kind of picturing here. And it is stunning. And the next screen, if we go forward again, Steve, this one I think is one of my favourites. It is stunning. And then we get the first kind of look at some of the creatures, and we got my absolute favorite coming up. I'm sure it's on this one, not the dragon. Is the green cat.
Oh yeah.
This
The Karma Cat.
that again, I think this is the image that I saw on socials, and it just pulled me in because I was like, what is this? It's so magical, so beautiful. The eyes are just mesmerizing.
Yeah. So this
Um,
was done by, one of our artists, Brian Veleza, and it's funny. Before he started working with us, I don't think he really had any cute animals in his portfolio. And
really?
now, yeah, thanks to working with us, he probably has a good dozen.
Yeah.
Because Darcy has a tendency to want to create not just fearsome like the dragon you saw before, but also a softness. And even in this dragon image, you see the dragon looking at these large eagles, these bald eagles that are sort of flying by. And that was, I think, a really keen world building tool that like we were like, oh, we don't just want to have a dragon who lives in this cool location. We want to think about how this creature is also going to be the apex predator of this region. And if so, how does it fit within the larger ecosystem of this world? But yeah, back to the cat, like for Darcy, it was a no-brainer. That was like, you have to have a mix. You can't just have the powerful. You can't just have the awful. You also have to have the adorable, and you have to have the weak. And this has plagued our systems designer, Brian, a little bit to no level. Now we have all these sort of like cute creatures in the game that are not super powerful, like, monsters to fight against. And like, well, how do we keep them interesting? And so one of the ways we kept the Carbocat interesting from a lore perspective is these creatures have a sort of luck magic built into them, and to do any sort of ill will or harm to them is basically to put a curse upon yourself. And we kind of leave that up to game masters to decide how that curse will manifest, but that's a bit of the lore around this creature.
Coming back to that dragon, I based on that artwork alone, I didn't find that to be malevolent. He looks kind of regal, kind of wise.
Yep.
But the wings. I mean, the wings made of stone. It's just an incredible idea. Again,
these also floating islands, aren't they?
Yeah, these are the floating islands. Yeah. So the highlands, from a very early pitch, like we knew we wanted the mountains to float, and we knew that like, because what it does, right, is like, as a storyteller, like anything can be in a floating mountain, right?
Yeah.
It could be an old like ruin that needs to be explored. There could be a rare mineral. And then like, so what happens if a town relies on a rare mineral that only comes from one floating mountaintop? Suddenly that creates an interesting tension.
Yep.
Like, is there a dragon that will ferry you from one place to another? What happens if that dragon goes missing? And so like, these are the fun little world building elements that get you thinking. And that was very much intentional.
Now, I wanted to talk before we run out of time. So everyone who's watching, thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions, do shout them out. Put them into Twitch chat. We want to try to answer your questions as much as we can. Steve, if you can come back to the UI screens, go back to the very first one, and just talk us through this, because this is the menu system. This is what players and GMs are going to be using. Again, the layout system is lovely. We got the kind of almost hexagonal tokens there as well. Talk us through the game choices, and we see we've got a few of the how we would see the RPG celebrity circles there. We've got Becca Scott and some of the Good Time Society.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get involved with them, and what is the
So it's a funny story. So Becca, we reached out to her and the Good Time Society to do our first trailer for Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And we knew them through our trailer guy. So like I come from an animation background. Yeah. That's what I did before games. And a good friend of mine was like, oh, you got to talk to Ivy's studio. Which makes killer board games, by the way. And they're an animation studio. And they're like, oh, yeah, talk to Ivy Studio. They'll make you the best trailer. They know everybody. And I was talking to Zach, who runs that studio, and he was like, oh, yeah, like, I know Becca. Like, you want me to reach out to her and just see if she's interested? And she was interested. And then, like, Becca was like, oh, so who are you thinking about being in this thing? We're like, we don't really have any Heart Desires like, you mind if I ask some of my friends? And they're like, cool, who are
Yeah.
your friends? And she was like, oh, I'm gonna bring Abria and Omar. And it's just like, okay. And Xander, we're like, yeah, let's get these people to be here. They sound awesome. And then unfortunately, of course, when they were shooting the thing, I got COVID after going to PAX Unplugged in Philly.
No.
Yeah, so I was at Philly. Love PAX Unplugged, by the way. And then of course I paid the price and I got COVID from it. But yeah, so interface wise, we work with some absolutely brilliant graphic designers, some of which I've been working with for over 10 years now. And so, the two of them, there's Ben Rudlin and there's Jacqueline McKay, and they are just top notch. And so again, like they come from an origin story similar to mine, where they didn't start in games. They started in mostly advertising and websites.
Mm-hmm.
And then they came into games sort of after the fact. We all worked at Dots together, which was my previous company. And I think those sensibilities are pretty obvious here. Like we really focused on making this feel kind of a hybrid between like your typical video game UI and a sort of more approachable app UI, so that you don't feel intimidated like you could potentially when you're playing maybe like a JRPG or like an MMO or something, where sometimes that interface looks so awesome but isn't the most intuitive or approachable thing.
You don't want to click the wrong thing and then break everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was one of our biggest criticisms about the VTT space too, that sort of inspired us, was we loved playing online, but we were like, we don't want it to feel like we're using Photoshop. Like I use Photoshop quite a bit. I love it. I use Figma too. And I was like, I don't want, when I'm doing my prep for my game, for it to feel like I'm doing work now. Like I just spent all day writing code or doing graphic design, and now I feel like all I'm doing is just more graphic design, more coding, and like all I want to do is just put a cool background art in my scene, and it's so much work. And so we're like, no, we're gonna do the opposite of that, where it almost is fun to do your prep before the game, and so almost make a game of it.
Again, I can't say enough, but again, since we first met and we started talking, it's phenomenally beautiful. It really is, and this is every detail. It's not just the artwork we've been talking about, not just the battle maps, but everything is nuanced. It's thought about. It is beautiful. It really is.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're into the last 10 minutes, but we'll go through these screens as well. We know the demo is available now. What else? What are the next key dates for FABLECRAFT?
So I can't say any hard deadlines yet because they haven't been announced, but we've got early access right around the corner. That will be on Steam for both Windows and Mac OS. So later this summer. And then we're going to be doing, the tablet with what we're calling like the sort of global launch. And that will be later this year. Again, still trying to figure out exactly when that's going to happen. We're actually just in the sort of like beginnings. Well, I shouldn't say beginnings. We're in the mid process of the tablet port right now.
Do you see the tablet being a big uptake? Because
yes,
are you showing this on conventions and computer game expos?
Yeah, so we'll be at PAX West later this year, and then we're going to be also at PAX Unplugged in December. So folks who are in the States going to those conventions, come stop by the expo hall and say hello. But yeah, I think for us, like, we want this to be a product that you play both remote and in person. And so for me personally, I'm very, very excited about the tablet port, because I think, I play this game with my son and his best friend. They're 8 years old, and right now they have to play on laptops, and it's fine, but it just like, I feel like it creates a little bit of separation at the table that I'm not very excited about. Like I want the screens to be flat on the table so that there is no separation between the players and that they can just talk freely to each other.
It'd be nice if there was a way to do again me this has just popped in my head, but if you have so we've used screens and paper maps and everything else in the center, and we put minis on top. Like again, ideas for the future. Would you ever have a central screen with potentially 3D printed minis that do you know like Skylanders? Do you remember
Sure.
that type
Yeah.
of game where you could put something on the screen and that gets beamed down to your tablet now? So you have almost like a pre-gen character which is 3D printed. Data's there, comes onto your personal character sheet, so you can roll dice and interact with that. And maybe certain elements are on your tablet, but the main screen is still what's on the table for the group. Again, in person. But then if you're separate, you've just got the normal view you would have anyway that you would dial into on a big screen or a tablet. I love that kind of mixing it up again, trying to push the technology as far as it can go.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is if enough people want it, we'll build it. Like that is like always my go-to. So we have this thing called feature upvote, which a lot of indie studios use. And we have the community from our Discord,
Yeah.
just constantly sending us awesome ideas and requests for features. And yeah, so we're very responsive to the community. We want to hear feedback constantly, the good and the bad. And yeah, I think that like if there's a big push for VR, if there's a big push for Switch or for Steam Decks, like that's the sort of stuff we're keen to explore.
I mean, we mentioned it off air. We mentioned it right back at the beginning as well. But because of RPGs and TTRPGs are absolutely massive. I mean, they are a global phenomenon right now. I mean, this is this is in line with like Pokemon kind of credibility globally. It's absolutely insane. But because of what has gone on in recent past, an explosion of original gaming has been released. As you say, you got small companies who have these ideas and go out there and do different things. Do you do you talk to other companies who are similar to you in this kind of range, in this kind of marketplace to see what their reactions are to it? Because there must be that kind of game producing community out there who are just all new startups, all starting around the same time because of what's happened in this
Oh, for sure.
marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, so I know some of the folks over at One More Multiverse, which is another VTT, and unfortunately that just got shut down, which is
Right.
heartbreaking. But they had a very interesting approach where they were like, again, they wanted to gamify things a bit, and they went for a very pixel art aesthetic.
Yeah.
And then I know some of the folks over at Alchemy as well, another brilliant VTT. And I think, whether it's Chris Eddy's co-founder of Alchemy, or Sarah, or some of the other folks over at Multiverse, I think like the exciting thing is there's just so many different ideas on how to tackle the problem. And the big problem is, you're right, like TTRPGs are big, but frankly, they could be even bigger. Like I really believe that. Like you look at, say, the numbers from Baldur's Gate, and you see the opportunity, right? Like Baldur's Gate easily outsold Dungeons and Dragons, all Dungeons and Dragons products for that year. And the question is, well, how many years? Because we're talking about tens of millions of units sold for Baldur's Gate 3. Like I think some of the estimates I was seeing were north of 60 million, like 75 million units sold. And if that's
Crazy,
if that's the case, that blows out every book sale of 5e for the last 10 years, which is crazy. So, like the question is like, why are people coming to Baldur's Gate? versus the actual IP that spawned it. And I think a big reason why is just because it's hard to break into. Like, anybody can play Baldur's Gate, and frankly, I believe anyone can play a TTRPG too. But it is a very daunting task to ask somebody to drop $50 for a hardcover, to read that hardcover, and then understand it well enough to have the confidence to jump in to play these sort of games. And so that's our, not just Fablecraft, but I know a lot of the other folks too. Like, that's what we're trying to do, is we're just trying to make this stuff way more accessible.
Yeah.
We've got a few minutes left. Steve, do you have any questions that have popped up? And do you want to, if you talk us through the last screens of the interface, let's get those up on there as well.
Cool. So this is the story scene where you do like all your storytelling, and you can see right up there that you have sort of what we call the environment variant selector, which is a really nerdy term, and you can toggle it from daytime to nighttime to haunted and not haunted. And yeah, it's, again, like, we just wanted to make this stuff as simple as humanly possible.
Yeah.
Again, I love that idea as well, because the haunted is a soundscape as well.
Yeah.
Which is beautiful. Again, it mixes in. It's so atmospheric. It's really, really nice.
And so this is the just joining campaign scene. And here, again, we just wanted to make it really friendly. So if you are joining a campaign for the first time, you know exactly what to do. And actually now we have it set up where you can just use a deep link. So like, as you're creating a campaign, you can just send a link to your friends, and they click it, and it will immediately have them jump right into it. So they don't even have to click that accept button.
I have a VTT question. So I didn't spot this in the demo, so it may just be because it is the demo. But for later releases, we've seen the gameplay where we got Becca Scott and the team down the left hand side, and we can hide those cameras, but we can leave those in. If we were doing a live broadcast, so if what we want to do at some point is Band of Badgers, I've been telling everyone about this. We want to play through. Now I would normally capture my screen, which would be the GM screen, but that also gives stuff away to the audience if you want certain things to be a surprise. Is there a way that I can broadcast almost like a player screen or an audience screen? So we have the GM, we have the players, but now we have an audience screen. Because at times what we're going to be doing is later in this year, 2024, and early 2025, we will be doing live stage playthroughs as well. So we want to have the big screen behind us. But again, we don't want to show the GM screen. So is that something that could be in the mix? Or is there a way now to actually do that?
So right now, no, you can't do it. So what we are calling this is spectator mode, and it's effectively like a player who is in the game who doesn't control a character. And what it is, it's effectively, it's a camera person, right? So like you could use that exclusively for streaming, and that would be controlled by a completely different person. So that way the game master doesn't have that pressure of being like, well, what am I going to show on stream versus like what I need to tell the story? Because I might need to be looking, I don't know, at a stat block for a monster or something. We don't want that added pressure of like also being the person responsible for showing what the stream is seeing. So that is kind of our plan for that, as sort of like a version 1 of what we can do there. And in the meantime, if you are streaming, I do recommend, if you don't want to like give snippets away, just have one of the players who are comfortable with navigating interface, just have them do it. And that way you can go from like the side view video to the full screen video, and sort of like vice versa. Like we do that all the time when we're streaming. It works out great.
Nice. We got some more screen. We saw this screen earlier. I love the different skins of dice.
Yeah, they're great.
Is this something that's going to be you're going to add to over time as well?
Oh,
These
yeah.
different the token skins, and
Oh,
is
yeah.
it easy for people to create so that they could you could run competitions, do it that way?
So that is harder tech, but it is doable.
Okay.
So like in general, creating a 3D model and uploading it to the game is a little tricky
Gotcha.
just because for technical reasons. But it's not impossible. I mean, we're not talking about like creating like, I don't know, like a machine gun. It's just a cube. So I don't think it's impossible, but it is, say, like right now we're allowing people to upload video, audio, and images.
Yeah.
And that's pretty straightforward. But even that sort of like proposes some challenges, namely like making sure that everyone's using the correct video format. Like we want everyone to be using MP4s, and you know, it can be a little bit tricky.
We've got some more screens here as well.
Yep, you can see
that is
the cute
giant
little
token.
sheep.
Yeah. But this is the battle map we talked about earlier. This is one with the walls and the height control, and there is a very big dragon token in the middle there.
Yep. And so the fun thing, this can be a little sort of band of badgers first. So we're working on our dragon kits right now. And so
Nice.
what are the fun things that the dragons can do, which is currently an exclusive dragon only ability, is that they have an opening ability. So our game is broken down into, basically, you can think about it similar to bonus actions, where you have openers and your main action. And so dragons as an opener have this thing called dragon flight, and it basically just lets them move wherever they want onto the board, which means, you know, the nice thing is they just have this mobility despite their size, and they're never going to be stuck in one location. So that's pretty awesome, and I've been loving the animation we actually have for that rock dragon. Like we modeled those 3D wings, and so when the token takes flight, you see the wings sort of like spread out like this, and just it flies up into the air.
I love that. Love that. We got the number one. Oh, not that one. Where's my screen gone? My screen clicked off. There we go. This one.
Yeah. So this is our roll request feature. This is a great example of one of the pieces of interface that came together throughout playtesting, where in the beginning we didn't realize how important this was going to be, and then it has become like a backbone of our what we call adventures and game master guide. And so anytime as a game master you want to send a roll request, you'll see this little pop up, and you can set the difficulty at the top to normal, difficult, or impossible. And then you can select exactly who you want to send it to. And very quickly at a glance, you can see how good they are at that particular ability.
Yeah, which is always handy as well, because we never is again, going back to sort of D&D, you have a side note of what people's stats might be, or saving throws or whatever.
Yeah.
But
perception scores particularly.
Yeah, and you always forget that that your bard is going to have a +10 to pretty much everything, and they'll find a way to get it done.
And the final screen, as we've run over time, but let's talk. What's happening here as well, because we've got the dice there.
Yeah, so again, trying to just constantly communicate the mechanics through the visuals. So like in this instance, when you roll a botch, which is that fun little X-Men X, we color code that with a red. In general, red are typically a bad color in our game. So for example, all foes have a red health bar, and the friends have blue, like the sort of FABLECRAFT blue health bar, and the yellow is just a sort of neutral good color. So if anytime you see yellow, it's we're trying to reinforce that as a good thing. So anytime you roll a 2 or a 1, you'll see that yellow pip sort of crop up, and then in the bottom there, you'll see that there are these little circular tokens. And so when we're doing character staging for a particular scene, those are the tokens that we use. Right now, both players and game masters can click on those tokens to see more information about those sort of characters. But we have gotten, again, talk about great feature requests for the community wants to block that, so that basically the community like really wants the ability to block pretty much everything. We've gotten so many requests like, don't show health bars, don't show damage numbers, don't show die results. I'm like, okay, we're going to show nothing.
Yeah,
but like,
it just toggles, yeah.
So yeah, this will be part of the campaign setting stuff that's coming out soon.
Cool, fantastic. Right, we are going to wrap it up there, folks. David, thank you very much for joining us and
Of course,
just hanging
thank you
out.
for having me.
Always welcome. Hanging out, having a chat about FableCraft. We will leave you with the trailer before we log off. But David, don't go anywhere, and we'll talk to you after this. But until next time, we'll see you all. Goodbye.
Bye.